Chapter 3. Now I'd be the first to admit that I'm seldom that diligent when it comes to reading the briefing slates, but I was sure I'd have noticed something that crucial to my well-being in my cursory glance through it. Commissar Caiaphas Cain. To serve the Emperor. A Commissar's Life. The planetary projection disappeared, replaced by 3 individuals. One was an elderly man, bald, wearing flak armor, with an array of tomes and scroll cases slung across various parts of his body. His chest-plate bore the dreaded sigil of the Inquisition, concealed behind a long, straight, white beard. The comfortable armchair he sat in was flanked by a man who wore a remarkably thoroughly pressed, single-breasted military uniform, which was complemented by epaulettes on each shoulder, a medal on his chest placed opposite the buttons, and a flat service cap. It was the unmistakable attire of the Mordian Iron Guard. His face was clean-shaven, and his expression carried a similar sense of determination to Palatine Comnenus, albeit one far less intense and homicidal. Standing opposite the guardsman was his exact inverse in all things. To say she was clothed differently would be an exaggeration, and it would be more accurate to say that she was simply clothed less. A high-collared, button-down jacket had been reduced to the point that it only covered her upper chest, leaving her arms and midriff completely exposed. Her pants were leather, with a strip of moderately reflective metal studs accompanying the outer seam. She had an augmetic left eye and a mohawk so tall it would have rendered the mere thought of headwear laughable. Her expression was one of utter boredom and disinterest. Both guards were roughly 45 standard years of age. The arrival of the 3 inquisitorial agents was immediately followed by an instrumental rendition of "The Eagle Soars Forevermore" crackling through the speakers on the holo-display. The elder scholar was the first to speak, displaying as he did a surprising level of energy for one of so many years. This was the enigmatic Walter Anselm Cain, our mighty commander, whose appearance was so typical of the expectations of an inquisitor that I have no reservations documenting it here. I doubt I could locate the man from that description, let alone the average dissident. It might very well be a breach of protocol to transcribe the introductory reel, as despite its intolerably low production value, it was likely considered classified inquisitorial material. In summary, it was needlessly long and phrased to explain the intricacies of spycraft and subterfuge to the most uneducated riffraff the Imperium had to offer, so long as they had a sufficient understanding of Low Gothic. The Palatine was kind enough to cease the recording after Rule 16. A good acolyte practices good hygiene, and I was thankful for her mercy. It was, at the very least, illustrative of the kind of man Inquisitor Cain is and the sort of company he kept. Throughout the briefing, he emphasized the importance of gathering forbidden knowledge while resisting the temptation to use it. His 2 companions were about as stark opposites as they could be, and I was curious what force of personality he maintained to enable them to work together. The reel was also quite illustrative of how little he, or his editors, understood the art of film-making. Several takes were left in the final cut where the scantily clad woman made salacious comments towards her opposite in the military uniform, and the Palatine's name was clumsily inserted to leave room for whatever other unfortunate interrogator had to show this to their new squads. Editorial note. Yes, that's me he's talking about. Inquisitor Cain told us the training reel was essential to teaching the next generation of acolytes. My occupational opposite featured in the reel is Fortuna. She's saved my life multiple times, and I've done the same for her, but I only tolerate her presence when the mission demands it. Also, no, we are not and have never been romantically involved. I have a husband. His name is Valten. That travesty aside, Comnenus said with considerable grief as she looked back to the projection, Inquisitor Cain vanished without so much as a farewell, and once again morphed into the surface of the planet. I had, of course, heard everything she was about to say already. This is Caneus. It is classed as a feral world in Administratum records, but the reality of the planet is far more complicated. 3 standard millennia ago, the world was beset upon by an abominable intelligence which destroyed all semblance of imperial governance. The machine stood taller than even the largest of the Legio Titanicus god engines, and carried weapons capable of untold destruction. It came to be known as the World Breaker by the planet's denizens. The holo-display zoomed in on an otherwise unremarkable portion of the planet to show the mechanical Goliath, intact and sunk into the ground a ways. And indeed, it was mighty. making the Imperator-class Titan placed at its feet for scale look like an expensive children's plaything. To the uninitiated, an Imperator-class Titan is the tallest of the mechanical behemoths deployed by the Adeptus Titanicus as of the 42nd millennium, measuring 140 meters at most, and only reaching the Worldbreaker's waist. The Worldbreaker's design was foreign to the sensibilities of a 42nd millennium man such as myself, but not inhumanly so. Its armor plating, which I surmised was once the very image of sleekness, overlapped perfectly across arms and legs the size of a grand cathedral each. One arm strongly resembled a standard Magnacore M35 plasma gun, and I could only imagine the amount of energy it must take to power such a weapon, as well as the sheer devastation it was capable of during that most terrible rampage. The other arm was pointed to the ground, its elbow joint having lost integrity after millennia of weathering, and appeared to be some kind of scaled-up chainsword, though I noticed no teeth emerging from it. Every other available square meter of space on its legs had some kind of weapon port, while its pauldrons boasted a network of void shield generators. Its head resembled a remarkably ancient Terran helmet, perhaps from before the second millennium. It was the sort which curved around the cheeks and had a brace over the nose, exposing only its wearer's eyes, which in this case were a set of menacing ocular receptors which receded into the blackness behind the decorative plate. I suspected they were once capable of firing a devastating las barrage, as even ancient humanity still found wonder in that ever-cliched visual. Topping each shoulder pad was a cannon that looked like it could atomize a city if aimed properly. Now, a rebellion has arisen using it as a perverse symbol of their strength. 10 standard years ago, the world of Caneus fell to heresy using the Worldbreaker as their rallying cry. They declared independence from the Imperium of Man and the God Emperor, and swore fealty to their King of Kings, a man calling himself Lord Argus Panoptes. The name slid through her lips with such utter contempt one could be forgiven for mistaking it as the name of a ruinous power. Playback data entry 062-5B. A picked recording of a burning cityscape took the Worldbreaker's place. Standing just in front of the unfortunate soul tasked with visually documenting the calamity was a young woman. Though I could not discern the color of the innumerable gauds she had chosen to robe herself with, the sheer conspicuousness of her attire remained plain to see. Every millimeter of her vest and trousers was coated in filigree. Short, puffy sleeves gave way to swirling tattoos on her left arm and a pair of elbow-length fingerless gloves bearing too many embedded gemstones for any sensible individual. Her features were sharp, crossed by a faded scar on her right cheek and jaw, and drowned under ludicrous quantities of eyeliner. Her hair was short and dark with the exception of a neatly kept bleached lock which hung over her left ear. Behind her, partially concealed by the edge of the frame, was the very picture of a strong leader. The powerfully built man wore no shirt and had a pair of trousers dotted with loops and hooks, perhaps to attach climbing gear. His right hand was placed inside the unmistakable bulky frame of a power fist, a powered frame strapped to the same arm to assist him in using it. He appeared to be gripping something off-screen with his free hand. Emerging from behind the opposite hip was a plasma pistol of ancient make, its grip fat and shaped precisely to the hand. The most peculiar thing about him was his helmet, a perfect facsimile of the Worldbreaker's head with one unusual addition. It sported a wreath made not of leaves, but metal slivers, which curled and folded into each other as they climbed into the air above each eye. As I was admiring its craftsmanship, the young woman began to speak, and I silently cursed every malevolent entity and ne'er-do-well that had ever failed to kill me in the past for allowing me to witness this. Editorial note. It is here that Dr. Bellicus descends into an impassioned rant regarding the degradation of culture and intellectualism typified by the Atlas twins, Pictcasts, and associated noospheric content. For the sake of brevity, and maintaining a focused narrative, I've chosen to omit it in favor of a transcript of data entry 062-5B. The full, unedited version can be found in the officially published version of his account. Diane Atlas, Hey there, people of Caneus. It's the girl who holds up the world coming at you live from a very, very special party today. Damien Atlas, unseen, directs the picked feed towards several burning buildings. Things are getting pretty wild out here. Diane. We are finally getting the chance to trash Meridian and show that asshole Sky Emperor that we don't need him anymore. Bolters in chat. Damien. Ooh, lot of viewers today. I think this is our biggest cast yet. Hey Diane, what if... Panoptes cuts him off. His voice is deep, menacing, and reverberates through his helmet. Silence. I did not request this be recorded so the two of you could gawk at your metrics. This is history in the making, and every person on this planet, be they revolutionary or traitor, should bear witness to it. Diane. Shit, sorry. Damien. Continue. The picked feed moves to Panoptes on the steps of Governor Emilian Marchant's mansion. Panoptes is gripping Governor Marchant's collar in his free hand. His armored allies have shotguns trained on Marchant's wife and 2 sons. Panoptes. I will begin with a message to the Imperium of Man, and to whatever false prophet masquerades as the God Emperor. This is your doing. You have driven us to this with your tithes and aristocracy. We will be your slaves no longer. He turns from the camera and looks down at Marchant. Panoptes. Tell me, Governor, do you fear death, or do you believe your Emperor will save your soul after I wring it from your lifeless body? Marchant is silent. Would your Emperor want you to sacrifice yourself to save your family? Again, Marchant is silent. Sweat rolls down his face. Panoptes. Pathetic. History will remember you as a coward. He looks to the 3 men holding shotguns. Dispose of them. Marchant looks horrified as his wife and children's heads are shot into paste and splatter the front steps, captured in full, gory detail by Damien. Panoptes laughs. Panoptes. This will be the end of your bloodline, Governor, and your paltry excuse for a dynasty. Tell me, where is your daughter right now? Marchant is frozen in horror. Panoptes grabs one of his arms with his power fist and crushes it. Bones audibly snap. Panoptes, talk. Marchant. She's on an escape ship getting off this planet, far away from filth like you. Panoptes releases his grip on the shattered limb. Panoptes. Is that so? Do you consider that a victory? That your own daughter will grow up knowing her mother and father had to be killed to bring about a better world? How cruel you are, but I can admire your honesty. Marchant grips his Aquila necklace with his remaining unbroken arm. Marchant. The Emperor protects. Panoptes. The Emperor's protection, and his rule, are fragile, Governor, much like your skull. He quickly grabs Marchant's head with his power fist, and squeezes it into a pile of paste and bone fragments. He then turns to a crowd that has gathered behind the camera, blood still dripping from the power fist. People of Caneus, the Imperium of Man has no power here. Scour their bureaucrats and their soldiers. Tear down their churches. Make them regret their oppression of our people. We shall sunder their regime just as we defeated the Worldbreaker. Today we are free. Diane whispered, like if you hate the Imperium. Damien cuts the feed. Dr. Bellicus's account resumes below. And furthermore, she reminded me of the shallow congregations which, in my youth, mocked me for my lack of interest in military affairs and worthless trivia about the 9 loyal sons. How my soul sang with fury at such a defilement of all that is good and decent. I found myself finally capable of empathizing with that most venomous specimen we called Palatine, for this could serve as an approximation of her feelings on the unfortunate psyker at my side. It may seem callous that I have so little to say on the untimely death of Governor Marchant, but truthfully, I have read or watched so many accounts of the gruesome executions of negligent bureaucrats that a power fist and a pair of shotguns seems positively humane by comparison. It was sure to be less painful a demise than archoflagellation, drawing and quartering, or being coated in promethium, ignited, and tossed into the deepest available gorge like the discarded lieutenant of an old knight techno-barbarian. The Palatine seemed to notice my barely contained desire to see this rancid material stricken from the historical record, as her mouth twitched upward. It was a nearly imperceptible change, of course, but I had developed a certain talent for reading faces after a rather frustrating sabbatical among the Order of the Sacred Rose. Sister Petra seemed similarly enraged by such a vapid celebration of heresy, her scarred features twisting into a sneer. Knox took on a forlorn expression, almost staring through the projection, and the commoner smiled wryly. Neither the psyker nor Enoch were particularly moved. As expected, I presumed a man who so devotedly coated himself in mementos of the deceased had similarly unpleasant kills to his name. Your mission is to destabilize this petty attempt at evading the God Emperor's divine authority by eliminating its leaders, culminating in the execution or capture of Panoptes. I demand his head intact as proof of his demise, and failure to recover it will not be tolerated. It's not like you tolerate anything else, the young psyker muttered, too quietly for our superior to hear, but just loudly enough that I knew she wanted it heard. Palatine Comnenus continued, However, a planet so consumed by heresy is never easily purified. Panoptes cowers behind armies of blind followers and an array of weapons from that accursed time before his light graced the galaxy. The warlord's citadel is built in the remains of the Worldbreaker itself, and breaching the hull of a Dark Age Titan is beyond our resources at present. Permission to speak, ma'am? Miss Knox asked without the slightest change in her stance. Her accent was surprisingly reminiscent of a lower hive worker for someone of her status. Granted. Is there anything stopping us from bombarding the site from orbit? Comnenus raised her chin and scanned the disciplinarian. Every expression she had displayed since we met was one of judgment, but this glare seemed particularly evaluative. Aside from Inquisitor Kane's desire to leave as much of the planet's archaeotech intact as possible, yes. The Worldbreaker's orbital batteries have somehow been restored to full functionality, and could rend the Holy Wisdom in two while we attempted to position the ship. Understood, ma'am. With a whirring of servos and a wave of Comnenus's hand, a larger-scale map of Caneus replaced the menacing visage of Argus Panoptes. That is to say, the projection zoomed in on a particular area of the planet. It shall forever frustrate me when laymen confuse the meanings of large and small scale. Densely forested mountain ranges were cut by rivers both arterial and tributary, and separated by lush plains. Cities and towns crowded the banks of the mightiest river, which neatly split a colossal plateau at roughly the center of the map. In order to expose Panoptes' vulnerabilities, you must begin by shattering his chain of command. To this end, you will capture or execute each of the heretics who serve as his lieutenants and regional governors. Your mission will begin here, in Oyo Manasi Yan, the planet's breadbasket. A fascinatingly complex name. What history was woven into each of its three parts, I wondered. It contains the widest array of cults, cultures, and languages of any region on the planet. As it is too diverse and too decentralized for any one creed to dominate the minds of its denizens, the region is racked with internal conflict. The largest contingent of known native loyalists is located in the village of Akus on-En, but they are... She grit her teeth again, this time at the thought of her own allies. Mutants, beastmen, hardly human in any capacity. They are sanctioned, but I shed no tears for their dead. They are unworthy of martyrdom. I suddenly became uncomfortably hot underneath my jacket. As I was moving to rid myself of it, I realized that the psyker to my right was quite literally radiating heat. Young lady, calling forth the warp right now would be tremendously ill-advised. I cautioned her in my finest impression of a nobleman who just realized his scion is on the verge of destroying the dynasty in a matter of seconds. Shut up, was the only response I received. In the end, she heeded my warning, else I could not recount the scene to you now. A point of interest appeared on the map to indicate the position of our erstwhile allies, and the briefing continued unimpeded. Oyo Manasi's local government is oriented around a guild system, which pits various mundane trades against one another in a petty contest of influence. The most powerful guild masters send champions to duel for the position of regional governor, seated in the capital city of Aboji Tiajoba. Your first target is Bonesaw. The hololith began displaying the image of a promotional flyer for some kind of barbaric illicit fighting ring. On one side was the Pulverizer, a rotund, pale-skinned, bearded man with light hair and a sadistic smile. On the other was Bonesaw herself, a woman in her 30s with a strong jawline and a similarly dark complexion to myself. One half of her hair had been shaved off, and the other intricately braided into long cords about the diameter of one's finger. In stark contrast to her opponent, she bore a resolute expression, echoing eons of similarly victory-focused warriors whose depictions I had studied over my years of service. Her eyes looked directly towards the picked capture, and her mouth was pressed shut. Bold text beneath the two read, "To the death," eliminating any doubt regarding the fate of the pulverizer. She is a prize fighter, and the guild master of the Blacksmiths' Guild. Her rank granted by Panoptes is Queen of the Blade, a title clearly meant to elevate the regional governors beyond their status as insurgents, a futile effort. The great canyon's sweeping landscape reappeared, now displaying battle lines splitting up our destination, as well as the local capital perched upon the great central plateau. 3 Astra Militarum regiments have already been deployed to the surface, and can be called upon in dire circumstances to aid the operation. The nearest regiment to your deployment is the Griswold Gunners, specialists in mounted assault, who were selected due to the mountainous terrain's hostility to standard Imperial armored vehicles. This regiment could not have been particularly large or renowned, as across all my decades of research I had never heard of them. They are commanded by General Vernon, who is assisted by Lord Commissar Braun. You may make your inquisitorial connections known to them, and only to them, should the need arise. Another hand wave, accompanied by a choir of servos, heralded the hololith flying us northward. This landscape was flat and desolate, with only decrepit ruins to pass for settlements and fields of petrified trees to pass for forests. The venerable Death Corps of Krieg has been assigned to purge the wretched mutants of the irradiated western wastes. One of my subordinates offered to join them as an attached regimental preacher. She was slated for assignment to your squad, but convinced me to admit a common corpsman in her place. Emperor above the Death Corps. How they existed in the same sentence as venerable was beyond me, for they were horrors of war rendered in human form. A faceless legion of identical gas masks and trench coats, marching towards their deaths for the sake of redemption that will never come for sins committed hundreds of years ago. I prayed we would never need to fight alongside them, lest we risk getting deemed acceptable losses, and I feared what manner of suicidal battle plans our eventual comrade-in-arms would draw up. Heading southeast, the flight had us viewing a vast desert, roads and train tracks running across it like the veins of a great industrial heart. The Telan Desert Raiders were deployed to the great desert of Peltroro to disrupt the rebels' most vital production centers. Thus far, they have failed to do so. I had heard the Desert Raiders referred to as insufferable emperor botherers before, but given we were in the company of a battle sister who did not immediately sing their praises, I was curious if this regiment hailed from another culture on that inhospitable sandy rock they call home. Hopefully, it was one less concerned with adherence to dogma than those my priors had written about. What we were meant to do with the information regarding their failures was left unsaid, and with that we returned to seeing the whole of the planet. Are there any questions? I feared for the worst, as she had just handed the young psycho a golden opportunity to spew yet further vulgarity, or perhaps something more rash than that. But Petra preempted her. What became of the governor's daughter? She seemed to have a genuine care for the unknown girl whom everything was taken from by this rebellious upstart. Her accent was reminiscent of the few Vestroyan firstborn I had met in my travels, and I made a mental note to search their records for her origins if ever the opportunity presented itself. Victoria Marchant survived into adulthood, and is currently hiding somewhere on the planet, anticipating her ascent to the throne. You will soon be required to evaluate her qualifications for the position. I would have executed her father myself had I known how thoroughly he had failed in his duties, and if she intends to repeat his mistakes, you must correct that, she said coldly. I was hoping to pose the question to end all questions, so I could finally hurry out of the foreboding atmosphere of a ship's bridge crafted by a sororitas, as well as the oppressive heat. Will the remainder of the information regarding local politics, planetary history, and the Guard's movements be transferred to my data slate so I might read it before our insertion? She gave a remarkably polite nod. Indeed, there is not time to recount it all to you in person, for we all have holy duties to attend to. I wished to ensure that all of you, she said, looking directly at the ruffian and the psyker, would receive the most essential information regardless of your vices. Dismissed. The door unsealed behind us, white light from the promenade bathing the entryway and seeming more inviting than the warmth of the sun after an afternoon spent in a dank crypt. I made for it immediately, dreading the inevitable squabbling between a squad of such diverse professions and backgrounds, and hoping to savor my final moments of serenity and solitude.